Hello, everyone. This is Francine Crawford. Welcome to Autumn is Here. Today, we are going to speak to Dr. Fullilove, who's going to give us some information that's going to help us to better know how to help our aging parents. Hello, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Very well. Thank you for having me. So I think it's always appropriate to say something about who I am.
Please do.
And what is it that I'm bringing to programs such as this. I'm Dr. Robert Fullilove. I'm a professor of social medical sciences and the associate dean for community and minority affairs at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. I've been a professor at Columbia since 1990, so I'm in my 34th year as someone who's been very heavily engaged in public health activities on a wide variety of fronts. I've been engaged in public health research since 1986. And I am someone who hails from a long line of doctors. I am the son and grandson of Doctors Robert Fullilove. Dr. Robert Fullilove Sr. practiced medicine in Yazoo City, Mississippi from 1907 until his death in 1961. His son, my father, Dr. Robert Fullilove, practiced medicine from 1934 upon his graduation from Howard University's medical school until his death in 1986. At which time he was the president emeritus of the North Jersey Medical Society. So I'm someone who brings almost 115 years of medical knowledge to what it is I do in public health. And I'm aided substantially in the work that I do now by very closely working with Dr. Mindy Thompson Fullilove, who is probably the leading African-American social psychiatrist in the United States today. Dr. Fullilove, for 26 years, was a professor of psychiatry and public health at Columbia. She is now the professor of urban affairs and public health at the New School for Social Research here in New York City. And she is someone who is on her 11th book, talking about a lot of the issues that I think we get to talk about today. Wow. So I consider myself to be someone who has been in the business of medicine and public health for a very long time. I have years of examining what are many of the factors that drive the factors that have such a big impact on our health in the African-American community in the United States. And as someone who in January will turn 80 years old, I consider myself to be someone who's legitimately aged. I think I bring a lot to the table simply because I am an active full-time worker, teaching, doing research, some of which is international. I do a lot of work in France. And I believe that part of what I know to be a major factor in the health of folk who've reached my age is the degree to which, instead of retiring, I'm finding ways to keep busy. Okay. So of all the things that I think I see in the literature that looks at aging, and one of the major reasons why I'm really happy to be here is to extol the virtues of continuing to maintain active life, whatever that might look like. Right. Even if people aren't necessarily fully able-bodied, right, there appears to be a very significant impact that is conveyed when people are active as opposed to being static. Physical activity has a great deal to do with our level of health. If our physical activity is also combined with something that keeps us mentally active, those appear to be some of the most important ways in which the energy that all of us diffuse as living beings, that's one of the ways in which it's maintained. If you don't use it, you do in fact lose it. And I've always thought that one of the reasons I've done so well at this age is because I've never really stopped working full time. Now, I've been blessed with good health. Don't for 1 minute think that I'm not aware of what privilege comes from being someone who's at an academic medical center and as a consequence has access to some of the best doctors on the planet. But I think in addition to whatever it is I get from those kinds of benefits, what I know I can claim as something that's really important for myself is how much always having something to do, always being occupied with something that gives some purpose and direction to whatever activity I'm in seems to make a big difference in the level of energy that I have on a given day and the degree to which that energy is responsible for what a lot of people would describe as optimal good health. How about I stop there?
Okay. So let me ask you some questions about that. As far as aging, and well, I live in New York. So as far as aging, I notice that people are living longer. I know people are living longer, but economically, they're struggling. We have savings. People may have saved. They may have 403Bs or 401Ks and things like that. But if you live longer, you may outlive your savings. And then things don't stop going up. You know, things are rising in prices, even just food is rising in prices. Like, how do you speak to that? How do we work around that?
I think that part of what has been lost over the course of the last couple of decades is what used to be the community capacity to work together. Okay. You're describing situations that are particularly tough because we're in this all by ourselves. Mm-hmm. A lot of us basically have only ourselves to count on. Wow. The number of folk, men, who are reaching the age of 75 who are completely by themselves, having no contact, not just with members of the family, they may have outlived a lot of people, mm-hmm. but also having very limited friendship settings. So isolated living alone is one of the dangers of aging that is especially present amongst African Americans. And it's one of the ways in which what you're describing isn't just a challenge. It's the state that we're in. We are by ourselves. We don't group together. We're no longer a part of institutions like the church, whose job used to be to connect us all to each other and to the institutions that were in the community. We are in a social service nightmare where what we depend on is not each other, but whatever government makes available for us. Cut off our Social Security, and a lot of us are, going to be in serious trouble. Yeah, we have become very dependent, and it's a dependency that we experience individually. We don't do it collectively. What we used to do together, I have to say, it was the strength that kept us alive and allowed us to survive everything post-slavery. But modern life has basically made it almost impossible for us to be in communities together, where we're in a situation where we're as engaged and committed to helping each other as we are taking care of ourselves. I mean, how many of us have moved dozens of times because of urban renewal, mm-hmm. gentrification, changes in the housing patterns of the community, fires? If you were in New York City in the 70s and the 80s, when the South Bronx, for all intents and purposes, burned down, we used to have stable communities where we knew each other well enough to support each other. Mindy Fullilove's work is basically about what's happened since the World War II era, when changes in federal policy created cities that simply could not support poor communities like the ones we were in. They were constantly being bulldozed out of existence so that other civic uses could be constructed. We have been constantly moved by changes in the housing structures. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, which used to have almost 45% of the Black community in public housing, which was torn down within 30 years. All the public housing that was sponsored from the urban, the Housing Act from 1949 on, all the public housing that was there, every single one of those buildings, almost without exception, was torn down within 30 years of having been built. When you look at what that has done to the structure of the communities, which depended a lot on people knowing each other, interacting with each other, having the same spaces that they called their own, when you took away those spaces, you took away the glue that held everybody together. We're becoming increasingly individualistic. We're from a group of folk who were in community and who often define themselves in terms of where they live and who they connected to. The more you see those kinds of relationships broken up, the more you're going to create situations where at our age, people who've come through that period are more often far removed from the places where we grew up. We're in housing that we don't necessarily control. we are at the mercy of whatever services are provided for us because of disability, Social Security, or what have you. And we rarely know the people around us. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about New York City, isn't it the case that everybody in this town has a PhD in mind your own business? People are kind of proud of the fact, I don't know him. I don't know her. I don't have nothing to do with them. Well, part of what that means is that what used to be our strength, how much we knew each other, that's all dissipated. So you're right. Those are challenges. And they're challenges that are made all the more difficult because we're in this trying to deal with them by ourselves.
But what if any, suggestions that would get us back to community? And is there certain organizations? What do you suggest? Well,
I think more than anything else, there are all kinds of folk. I met you at one of those events where people were trying to connect the community. It's not as if there aren't folk out there who are trying. I can name dozens of churches that are involved in things like Choose Healthy Life. There are a number of interministerial alliance churches that do all kinds of work on social services, on medicine and public health. Mm-hmm. The city has a lot of services that are available and a lot of organizations that are trying to meet the needs. And I think part of what has to occur is people need to be more knowledgeable. That's why I think your program is so important about what's there. And as a result of knowing what's there, they have to sort of be active about seeking it out. This is one of those issues that comes down to what they call agency. How much of this is owed to us? How much does government need to take care of us? And how much of us is us just going and taking advantage of what's already out there? So I'm going to suggest that increasingly what I'm seeing is Black churches that are heavily involved in community affairs typically are less problematic than a lot of the nonprofits, are there because a lot of the people who are doing the work are literally from the community. They're not hired professionals from the outside. Right. And the more you're in places where folk are about the neighborhood and about the community, and the church is typically that, especially if it has a building there, the greater the likelihood that you'll find folk who are in a position to say, yeah, let's work together. Let's see what we can do collectively.
Okay. So in that situation, we have to somehow take ownership ourselves and try to seek out these community organizations, try to get active ourselves, and see what's out there and just help ourselves in some ways.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize how much these are not places or organizations that are trying to hide. Quite the opposite. They're doing their best to let people know, hey, we're here, we're doing stuff. So the idea that nobody's here and nobody's helping isn't really quite correct. But there does require that somebody at least be aware. And as a result of that awareness, tries to seek things out. Again, I think your program is important. If people are here, it's because they want to know, are there places I can go? Are there things I can do? And yeah, the things that are provided, especially by many of the neighborhood services in Brooklyn, they're enormous. They're enormous. A lot of them are based in places like Interfaith. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not, that's not what I do. I'm not somebody who runs those services. I'm not somebody who is involved in directing them. I don't do research on them. One of the reasons I'm happy to show up is that I don't have any interests that, are involved me trying to promote one thing versus another. Mm. The best thing about being a professor is I can say, I'm the guy who's aware of the fact that there is information out there. That information frequently is quite valuable. It is easy to find. If you are using a computer to connect to this broadcast, then you already have the skills necessary to search something out and find it. There are so many things that are screaming to be found. The most important step people can take is not to get another degree, not to spend more money. It's just decide, I'm going to look this up and then follow what it is you see. I believe that it would be interesting to see whether or not in following that kind of advice, your listeners, your viewers tell you, yeah, hey, this is what I did, and start sharing some of the things that they've found so that the community that is comprised of the folk who are connected to you starts to work with other members of this community to share things that folks have learned together that answer some of the key issues that you're trying to raise about how do we engage in healthy aging and how do we make sure that our seniors are well taken care of. I like the idea that if they share what they're learning through this process, everybody becomes the beneficiary.
Okay.
And that's the 21st century community, where we're not so much connected by buildings and by our physical proximity. We're connected because we care enough to be connected to broadcasts like your own, so that the simple act of tuning in says, I'm interested in doing something. And in giving people a suggestion that can easily be followed, just continue to search things out on your computer and share them. Wouldn't it be interesting to see what that ultimately produces?
Awesome. Yes. Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. Can we talk a little bit about like healthcare?
Sure.
That is a major issue, not only for aging, but just for minorities, for people who are not covered, how things are going up, medicines are going up, and the access to them. So how do we, well, I know we can't solve the problem, but how do we make it easier for people to have access to these things? Is that one of the things where this information is out there and we just don't know how to get to it? We don't just know how to work with getting better quality services or medical treatments?
Yeah, there are some nonprofits like Black Health. Now, that's a group I know about, which has really been militating for things like access to medications like insulin, where the prices are going through the roof and access becomes a key issue. A lot of this is embattled. In other words, you haven't necessarily want a lot of concessions, but there are a lot of people who are trying to put pressure on the pharmaceutical industry, who are trying to do a better job of making sure that some of our public hospital centers do what they can do to make sure that access to medical care doesn't come at such a price that people basically don't seek it out. Mm-hmm. So Health and Hospitals, for example, has a lot of hospital-based programs in each borough that are literally supposed to target opportunities for folk to get access to medications if they qualify along certain parameters. So number one, there are things like that. Number two, I got to be clear, there are no complete solutions. This is a problem and people are struggling. What I'm suggesting is that while they're struggling, they're not completely without access to resources that are being put together. My own really is based on what I see in hospitals and how the overall system that's governed by health and hospitals has a special area that's focused on making sure that access to medications isn't one of the things that drives the health of the poor health of the public. Again, I don't work in those areas, but I am with a lot of programs that try to use the access that's provided by these hospital-based services as a way of sort of doing the work that they do in the community. So, again, I'm not the guy who is in charge of or who works with either the creation of those programs or with the functioning that they have on a regular basis. What I'm often engaged in is working with groups and working with individuals to try and figure out how we can link resources that ought to be working together and collaborating together. And a lot of the work that I do is actually to get more of the hospital-based services present and available in communities. So where I met you was in one of those instances where Presbyterian Hospital, for example, had 3 of its units present, trying to get people aware of what was going on with cancer. Another was Alzheimer's and other diseases of aging. So I know that those are almost weekly events where the hospitals themselves are trying to come out and make available access to the services that are often useful in, for example, getting appropriate access to the medications that people need to keep themselves healthy. And I believe a lot that this is a worthwhile thing to talk up, because I'm at a lot of these health fairs where a lot of information is present, but the public is not. Right. Did I not see you at a place where there were more presenters than there were members of the general public?
Yes, yes.
It suggests that there's a problem. There are folk who want to solve the problem, and what they're waiting for is somebody to show up so that they can talk to them. And then there's the folk in the community who are saying, oh my God, I got these problems. I have no idea where to go or what to do, and aren't aware of the fact that something that's literally right around the corner might be the link through which they get access to better services. So I'm interested in coming and chatting with you because it's not that I have the links or the answers. I don't have a whole directory, a whole Rolodex. Here you go there. You talk to this person here. I wish I did. But what I know is that there are people who do have that information. And a lot of times they're available in very public settings where they're praying for more of the public to show up and say, hey, tell me what you got. Can you help me? So if our conversation tonight is one of the ways in which that point gets raised, I will consider this to be a big success.
Okay. So there seems to be some disconnect in the places that want to help, but there's a disconnect in people that either know that they're there or motivating them to get to those places. So there's like a disconnect somewhere.
Yeah. I don't think we know how to talk to people and get them to be okay about giving up a Saturday morning. In our community, that's like sacred. So the idea is that it might be free, but it does have a cost. And the cost is typically you've got to give up something that is part of a cherished bit of me time to do something that, has no obvious outcome, but at least has some potential to make things better. But it is a struggle. It is a struggle because what we're going against is the whole idea that we are set in our ways. We often do not like to do things that take us out of cherished routines. We're never that happy about going to a place where we know nobody and where we're expecting to get kindness from strangers. I mean, if I can just talk about the Black community, we're not big on that stuff. Oh, I'm going to show up. You're going to see my face. And the first thing you're going to do is shower me with stuff. I don't think so. That's not the way we've experienced life. So the idea that it's winter, it's dark, it's cold, or worse, it's raining. And you want me to get out of my house and go talk to somebody, I think we are eloquent when it comes to convincing ourselves that we got a better use of our time. And I think we're often too good at convincing ourselves to not take advantage of something that's right in front of us because we're just, mistrustful. And I know the older I get, the more mistrustful I am of everything. I'm the biggest cynic I know.
Really?
So if you get to be my age, it's like you doubt everything. You begin with the notion that anything that you hear is probably a lie. Your job is to figure out, is there some truth in that or should I just ignore this altogether? And I think we fall into the trap of being part of that flood of information that's out there, where everybody says they want to help us, they want to do good and everything. Yeah. But how do you sift through all of that and find something that's really worthwhile? And I believe that that's the challenge. We have to be better at getting the message out there. And part of making it better is making it more convincing, more compelling, so that folk do hear the word that, oh, such and such is happening, and they feel something of an obligation to come. Again, that's why I think the answer is in online communities of the type that I think you're connected to. I think we're more likely to do this because it's easy. And we're finding this to be a more reliable source of information. And if you have folk who keep coming back, they trust you. So all the things that I say are difficult when you got to get up on a Saturday morning and go meet with a bunch of strangers. Well, we don't have that problem in this medium, do we?
No.
And we can you and look at you, you're welcoming, you're all that. Then if this is where it has to begin, maybe all of our efforts to broadcast things on Twitter, on X, or post things on billboards, or flood the airwaves with television commercials or things on the radio, maybe the real way in which we get people to come out of, I'm going to describe it as the comfort zone. Maybe the real way we do that is to have it begin with what you're able to do.
Wow.
If people are sharing things that they all think is a good idea and they all sort of agree, yeah, let's go check this out together, and it works out, then I think a way of having the folk who have something to say get to connect to you, and using your networking capacity, they get to get a bigger crowd. If the crowd is happy with what they get as a result of showing up, then more folk are going to come to you because, you're the way, the truth, and the light. Yeah, I mean, isn't that how it works?
Yeah, I guess you're right. And this is a new world we have here where everything is electronic and people want, everybody always wants things quick and easy access and, nobody wants to do too much. So, maybe this is the way to get in touch with people,
Yeah, and I agree. I keep telling my students that they ought to be doing this kind of thing as often as they're invited. Anybody who's got a finger on the pulse of the general public, anybody who's got the ear of, your average New Yorker represents somebody who might carry a message with greater weight and greater authenticity than what we get going through, air quotes, official circles. So I keep thinking that, you represent the wave of the future. We got to do more connecting to folk like you, because there are clearly people that you're reaching that I'll never reach, based on the things that I know how to do. So I think it makes good sense for folk to see you as the kernel around which community might ultimately be built, and then do what we can to make sure that what gets built really does help people and does advance them in their efforts to do right by their family members as well as others in the community.
Wow. Okay. Well, is there anything that I know you do a lot of research, and is there anything that you come across that we take for granted or we don't know or we should know, anything about health issues or diseases or things like that the public doesn't, get involved with until something happens or something that's growing and expanding, and we don't know, and we need to be more aware of it in the early stages?
Yeah, I think you're completely right to ask what's out there. And it's interesting because just before I joined this podcast, I was reading something that comes out of one of the think tanks in public health that every week tries to summarize the viral threats on the horizon. In other words, where's the next pandemic coming and what's it going to look like? And I think you're right. It's not that there's something there right now.
Mm-hmm.
What's important is to know that there are people who are looking.
Okay.
And are all about an early warning system. Forgive me, but here again, I come back to what it is that you're doing here. I had a graduate student of mine who's now a professor at Columbia, who in 2015 was really interested in traffic on Google around Ebola. Turns out that one of the ways you could predict an Ebola outbreak would be to look how many people went to Google asking about symptoms of that viral disease. There's a sudden spike that occurs when suddenly, before people in medicine and public health are aware that they've got a crisis, where people start signaling their concern because somebody close to them is giving off symptoms and they're wondering what's going on. Do you see how this works? That a lot of what happens right now that we don't know about is often signaled not so much by the scientists in the Centers for Disease Control. It's people who are communicating with each other on the internet or communicating with information sources on the internet about something that they're seeing. So maybe you know that part of the way the CDC forecasts things like a big spike in flu infections is to look at the changes in the number of people who are looking that up on Google over the course of a given day, week, or month. So, yes, there are people who are looking out, and a lot of the looking out doesn't come about because they've got a super scientific detector out there that says, oh my God, there's something new floating around in the air.
Right.
No, we typically know that something is out there when people have symptoms. And when the symptoms become more than what we see on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, and the sudden increase in searches for certain kinds of symptoms is just a kind of an example of how we're trying to get a sense of when something is coming down by seeing at what point does it start to impact people so much it interrupts or interacts with the ways in which they use the internet. So, yeah, there are things like that that are out there. And again, my bet is a lot of what you will see on these early warning networks might even be folk who call into a program and say, hey, what do you know about this and what do you know about that? Because I'm thinking again that with all the information that is floating around, trillions of bits of information every single second getting generated. Part of what we do to make sense of all that stuff, how do we separate a noise out so that we just get pure signal? Well, it's in part by looking at changes on a day-to-day basis. Are we looking differently? Are we acting differently? Are we asking a different set of questions? What does it mean when people are doing this? And because this is all monitored, everywhere you go, they want to know how you are with cookies. It is a more accurate descriptor of what's going on than one might imagine. But you know the downside. Privacy does not exist.
Right. Yeah, that is a downside. And I think
because every move we make can be monitored.
Right. And that's one of the major changes that have happened over the years. It's just like you can't hide from anything. I mean, you can't have your own privacy. Well, not that you're doing anything wrong, but too many people know too much about what's happening and your movement, so that's interesting. But we need to, we're glad that there are people out there that are looking and trying to figure things out ahead of time before things happen. So that's good. Is there anything else that you would like to express today that would the listeners may be interested in knowing?
Yeah, just that changes in access to health insurance, especially stuff that comes from Medicaid, what have you. I think people aren't aware of how much, once you sign up, it's not for life, that everything about your eligibility and whether or not you're correctly connected to the system, that stuff changes every year. And a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that you can suddenly be dropped when you think you got everything covered, because we're not always paying attention to all of the notices that say, hey, you got to check in, you got to let people know what your status is at the moment. And because I'm dealing with a lot of folk who have suddenly had this, oh my God, everything disappeared on me. I do know that of all the things I'm hearing in some of the programs I do with our elders, that's one of the things I'm hearing people talk about. Oh, I didn't know. Nobody told me. So people need to be aware of the fact that in a lot of instances, making sure that you're current is one of the things that you do to make sure that whatever level of coverage you got is maintained.
So that's very important. I thank you so much for your time. I thank you so much for being here and, just being available to get as much information out. Like I said, you're a wealth of information, and I'm sure that you help a lot of people around, and I'm sure you're training, students to kind of do the same thing. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of Autumn is Here.
Thank you so much for having me. And goodbye, everybody.
All right. Take care. Good night.